Test, test. All right, it looks like it's about 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm Walter Yazzie. I'm the Assistant General Manager for HOA 2. And I'd like to welcome all of you that have taken your time to come out and to listen to what our experts on the panel have to say. And if this is really exciting for you, we're streaming it, so you can go back and pull it up on the website and look at it again if you want. I'd like to start today by, if you would all please stand and face the flag over to my right. I'll lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance . Thank you. You can have a seat. We're privileged today to have the Pima County Attorney, Kent Volkmer, with us today. And so I'll actually turn it over to him. Or Pinell, I'm sorry, Pinell County. Yeah, let's get it in the right county.
No problem. Today I'm actually going to be our MC. Normally our MC is Dr. Tasha Spears. She is the director of our Family Advocacy Center. Unfortunately, she had a medical emergency and she's actually on a flight, or her family had a medical emergency and she's on a flight to Canada right now. So bear with us a little bit. I'm going to be a little rougher than her, so the presentation won't be quite as smooth. But this is the third part in our educational seminar. We received a grant from the federal government to deal with elder abuse and issues that involve elders in our community. I don't set the standard, but the federal government normally says about 60 or older is when we start talking elderly. Don't throw tomatoes at me. I'm not the one saying that, but that's generally when we talk about stats, that's the cutoff, just because it's easier that way. Today's format, if you've been at the other two, is a little, this is going to be different than those two. Today's format, the program is actually titled "A Crime's Been Committed, Now What?" Also kind of known as Cradle to Grave. So the idea behind this is when something happens and you call the police, whether you call 911 or you call the non-emergency line, the idea we have is you're going to kind of go down and see this is the way that a case actually gets handled. I'm sure all of you have watched plenty of TV and you've seen Law and Order and you've seen NYPD Blue and all these different shows, and sometimes those shows cut out major important parts. And I think part of our responsibility is to really just make sure everyone understands the way that the criminal justice system really works. There's a process. I know people oftentimes very frustrated because of the length of time it takes. I mean, we just kind of want to go through it. And then at the end, we're going to do these presentations. Everyone's going to have an opportunity to speak. And then we have microphones on both sides, and we're going to answer questions. My hope is we do less talking and more conversating, answering questions. So there are no dumb questions. Don't feel bad about it. Our hope is that this is going to be educational. I know it's being streamed. Our hope is that if you like this, you'll go tell people and say, hey, watch this because there's going to be good information. If it's terrible and you don't like it, I just ask you to please be quiet. Don't tell anybody about this. I'm going to introduce everyone here. So you did hear from your Assistant General Manager, Walter Yazzie. He is going to talk about the role of the actual patrol here in SaddleBrooke. Your community is a little different than some others because you do kind of have your HOA 2 patrol that helps and assists the sheriff's office. Most communities don't have that, so I'm glad that he's here and he can kind of share in that role. We also have two different dispatchers here. We have Linda Ellsworth and Bob Woodhull. Both of those are dispatchers. Linda has worked for Pinell County for 25 years. She started as emergency dispatcher and then an emergency dispatch supervisor, and now she's the dispatch manager. And we also have Bob Woodhull, who's dispatch supervisor. He's worked for PCSO for 9 years after having spent 27 years in the private industry. Then those of you who don't know, we also have our sheriff here, Mark Lamb. Sheriff's been here for about 1.5 years. He was a police officer with the Salt River tribe, and then he was also a PCSO deputy for a period of time, along with a number of business ventures. But he's going to kind of give the straight law enforcement. So after dispatch calls out and says, here is, here police are here, he's going to take it from there, and then he's going to kind of hand it off to me, and then how the actual prosecution goes forward. I do want to note, when we set this up, I wasn't aware of this, but this is actually National Dispatchers Week. So it's just sort of a time to appreciate what dispatchers do. If you think about it, you have this emergency, you call 911. What would happen if nobody answered? What would happen if it was an idiot on the other line that didn't know what they were doing? It's one of those services that we don't think about, that we don't ever really mention, but it's one of those that's vital to our safety. I don't know about you, but if you call 911, there's an emergency going on. You need help. You're probably panicked. You're probably nervous. You may be injured. A loved one may be injured. These are the people that are trained on the other line to keep calm and to make sure that they get the right people to you. Because again, if you're having a medical emergency, with all due respect, sending the sheriff out for a medical emergency may not be the best thing. They may not be able to provide that care. Likewise, if you are suffering a burglary, sending EMTs out there is kind of worthless. So it's somebody who has to work under pressure. And I'm just want to say congratulations to them and just recognize that it is National Dispatchers Week. With that, I'm going to absolutely. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Yazzie.
All right, am I on? Okay. Just real quick, I'm for less talking, like the Kent said. So I'm going to just give you a quick overview of what you can expect from your patrol in the community. First of all, they are called patrol and not security. So a lot of times you may think they take on a real security role, but no, it's more an observation role and a reporting back to management that the patrol does. Just run down real quick some of the things that they do day to day. They patrol the streets, all the streets. Each shift goes down every street. So that covers the houses. Probably about 3 times a day, somebody drives by your house. Even at night when you're asleep, there's a patrol that one time during the night will come by the house and just watch and observe the street to make sure there's nothing going on. A lot of the things we do is we respond to calls from the community that they just need some help or direction. Patrol takes a lot of those and helps the community out any way they can. They also, you may use them for your vacation checks when you leave the community for extended amount of time. They'll go out and you can sign up for vacation checks. Again, they just do a once a week check of your house to make sure the water is not running and make sure there's no broken windows. And if they do find something wrong, they'll contact you, and if need be, they'll contact the sheriff. And now talking about situations where 911 has to be called, again, our patrol, they don't take anybody into custody. They don't do anything physical, but they will help you and direct you if the situation requires you to call 911 and get a sheriff out and a sheriff deputy and a report. Other things is just so you know, they don't remove snakes or animals. The fire department can help you with that. They don't jumpstart your car or help you when you lock yourself out of the house, but they do a lot of other things. And so I think that just briefly covers what patrol in the community does.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I know Linda and I are excited to be here to talk about our favorite subject, which is 911. When you dial 911, before you get to Linda and her staff of dispatchers, it comes through my office where we set up all of the phone lines and the cell towers to ring correctly. So when you do dial, if you have an emergency, it rings to the right place. Here in Pinell County, in the course of a year, there's about 100,000 911 calls made, of which the sheriff's office and Linda's group receives about 60,000 of those. The other 40,000 go to the other police agencies here in the county. And it's my office that routes all of those calls. So if it's a landline, we sit down in my office with Linda Herrera and myself, and we've matched up every telephone line and every address here in the county. We make sure that that's accurate all the time, every time. And so far this year, there have been about 2,000 addresses added here throughout Pinell County. So it's a growing county, and we're constantly updating the information and the mapping that we give to Linda and her staff, as well as all the other police departments here in the county. And as you can imagine, most of your 911 calls come in on cell phones, but we still do have about 20% are landlines. And when they come in to Linda and her group, they'll see your name, they'll see your address, and up on a map above them, they'll also see where you're located, exactly at your house. Now, if it's one of the cell phone 911 calls, which is about 80% of our calls, that will come up with your phone number, and it will plot up on a map, which, depending on how long you're on the call, depending on the geography, depending on the location of the cell tower, may or may not accurately locate your exact home. Now, Laura and myself in my office, we look at all the cell towers, we look at where the homes are, and we address where the police, which police agency will receive that call, whether it's here at the sheriff's office or one of the other police departments here in the county. So that's what we do before Linda and her groups actually gets your 911 call. And kind of last but not least, as a lot of you have added internet phone service, I just want to remind you, please make sure you put in your address exactly correct. Make sure if it's a court, you put in court, if it's an avenue, so that when you do dial, or if you dial 911, it shows up correctly and we can get a first responder there as quick as we can. So I want to thank you very much for letting us come here. I'm going to turn it over to Linda and what happens after the call comes in.
Okay, so when you dial 911, we have a series of questions that we're going to ask you in a certain order. We're going to why, what, and the result of why we answer in this manner. First off, we want to know your location. We want to know if it's a business, give us the business name. If give us the address, we're going to ask you to repeat it to verify it to make sure we have the correct, that we heard it correctly. If you don't have an address, you're out on a corner or somewhere, you can give us the cross street you're at or anything that will tell us exactly where you are. And if it's for like across your street, you see something going on, give us your address and tell us it's which direction from your house it would be. We're also going to verify your phone number. That way, if we lose connection with you, we can always call you back. And if you're unable to talk on a 911, a landline will show us your exact address. We will not only try and call you back, but we will have a deputy headed out there right then and there, so that if for some reason you can't talk or nothing, once you dial the 911, somebody's responding. A cell phone, we're not always positive where the exact location is, so we won't be able to. So if you, any way possible to give us an address from the cell phone, we definitely need it. It does show us up within, depending on what type of cell service you have, what cell company, what cell phone you have, the GPS will locate it anywhere from 6 meters to over 1,000 meters. So most of the time, if you can give us the exact location, it's better for us. But we will start looking for you if we haven't heard from you now. 911 hang-ups, if it's a hang-up from a cell phone, we're not going to come out to you like we will every time from your home landline address. And then keep in mind, some of the older phones, all we're able to get is the location of the tower. The tower could be miles from your house. So never rely on just because you call 911, we're going to know where you're at. We have 2 different phases. Phase 1, which will just give us the tower, and phase 2 will give us closer to where you're at. Now, if you have a cell phone that has a good GPS in it and everything, we are able to trace the cell phone. If you call on 911, it's also going to give us the cords on how many meters we're away from you. But if it doesn't have it, like I said, you don't trust a 911 cell phone to always remember to give us your address. Now, if for some reason you're involved in a crime or something and you're traveling down the roadway, you're on the cell phone with us, you've got a good cell phone, our maps will actually plot you as you're moving and we can follow you. And if for some reason when you call on a cell phone, we hear something distress in there, but we don't know where you're at, we can call your cell carrier and at least get your name and address and start from there. Okay, so after we figure out where you're at, we want to know what's going on. And with what's going on, the time delay, if it's in progress, or within 30 minutes, we're going to ask the following questions. We're also going to keep you on the line until a deputy arrives on scene for in-progress calls so we know what's going on. So one of the first times after we get the time delay, we're going to ask if there's any weapons involved. Is anyone injured? A vehicle description, which we call symbols, is by the color, year, make, model, body style, additional information, license, and state, what direction of travel they took off in, how many people were involved, suspect, subject descriptions, age, race, and sex, what their clothing is, height and weight, hair color, descriptions, eye color if possible, and any additional person descriptions like scars, tattoos, if you can get them. This will help us be able to locate them if they've left the area. If they're walking on foot or if they're in a car, we can look for them that way. If you witness them take some property, we're going to ask you what property was taken and where they might have put it. Now, if you call 911 for a medical, as they were saying, law enforcement does not respond to most medicals. So after we get your location and ask you what's going on, we're going to transfer you over to, for your area here, it would be Golden Ranch. So wherever you're calling from, it'd be the closest medical department. When we transfer your call, a dispatcher is going to advise the agency that we're transferring them to. So if you can give us a minute to give them your address and what's going on real quick, then they're going to probably call you back. I mean, they're going to be on the phone. They're going to ask you your address again. This is just to verify that everybody has the right address. So don't feel offended or that we're not listening to you if you ask your address several times. We want to make sure we know where you're at, that we can get some help to you. And so just so you know, dispatchers are all trained the same way to ask the same type of questions. And we train dispatchers, for the full dispatchers, for over 9 months. But for the phone systems, they're about 6 months. They always have somebody with them listening on a call. So if you call in on 911, you might hear somebody in the background. Could be a trainer, trainee, they're helping them out with you. And then just for some statistics in the area, for 2017, amount of calls that the sheriff's office where deputies actually went out on 911 calls only was 345. Now this is not counting any medical calls that you had that we just transferred to the ambulance that we've answered. And then when you call on our regular phone, we had like 908 different types of calls where we sent a deputy to help you guys out. And this is for the whole SaddleBrooke area of Eagle Crest, Oracle Junction. So we enter the calls, as we're getting the information from you, we have a CAD system where we enter all the information so that another dispatcher is relaying that over the radio. So even though that one deputy's dispatcher is asking you questions, we have another one talking to the deputy, so we have help on the way right away for you. And then depending on the type of call you have, we do set it up on priority. Like if we've got what we call H or a hot call, that's where somebody's life is in danger, weapons involved, something like that. We're going to get a couple deputies going and get somebody there as fast as you can, and we're going to keep you on the line until the deputy actually shows up on scene. And a priority 1 would be an in progress, where something still could go wrong, but no weapons are being shown, but you still need help right away. A type 2 call would be, priority 2 would be something that occurred an hour or longer. You're not in any type of danger or anything. But just know that we do have deputies going. As soon as one's available, they will be sent to that. And then your type 3 would be where you're at home, nothing urgent, but you'll be waiting there where the deputy can meet you. And then our last one would be priority 4, is where you only need a phone call from a deputy. And that's how we set our priorities, so that if it's something urgent or something, you will get somebody responding right away. Then I'll turn it over to the sheriff where it goes.
All right, thank you. Glad to see everybody here today. And as always, I want to thank you for the opportunity. Both myself and Kent Volkmer serve at your pleasure, and we thank you for that. I know both of us work very hard to make sure that we meet your expectations and we're responsible with your tax dollars and protect you at the same time. So the way it works is once we get a call from dispatch, who, by the way, they do an amazing job. We're very grateful for them. They keep us safe on the road. Once we get a call, she mentioned how all those questions they're going to ask you, just so you know, as soon as they start populating that call. So that call will actually kick out on our deputy's computer prior to them finishing all those questions. So as they're going along, the deputy's seeing the information that's popping up into the to the CAD call. So don't think that they're waiting until you give them all that information for a deputy to respond. He will be en route. Once we respond, and a lot of the calls we get out here are burglaries, thefts, we get some domestic, and we'll get the what we call 901 calls, which is a non-responsive person where we have to respond. That doesn't always evolve into an investigation. If a doctor signs off on a death certificate, or if somebody's in a hospice or those types of things, then that ends there. If there is anything suspicious that a deputy might see, then he'll take that further, call out some investigators to investigate that if there's anything suspicious. In this area, we typically have one deputy, but in this general area, Oracle, San Manuel, SaddleBrooke, SaddleBrooke Ranch, we usually have at least 3 deputies and a sergeant on. I know you would love to see more deputies, as would I. As you can tell, there was 300 calls last year here in SaddleBrooke. We get about 3,000 plus calls a month in Santan Valley alone. So we get a tremendous amount of calls other places in the county, and we're forced to make sure that we have resources in those areas as well. But we constantly are working hard on getting more bodies so that we can have more people, more deputies down in this area. Once we do get those calls, I'm sure some of you have had interactions with the deputies. We have great deputies. We try to keep these deputies that are in this area here a lot so that they're familiar with the community, the residents, and they know their way around so they can respond quickly to your calls for service. A lot of people have a question, what can they do if they're not sure whether they should call dispatch or not? So first and foremost, if you haven't, please download our phone app, which is Pinal County Sheriff's Office. You can download it if you have a smartphone. If you have a flip phone, you're out of luck. If you have a smartphone, you can download it on either the Android App Store or the iPhone App Store. What that does is that first and foremost has our non-emergency number on there. It has the numbers to the local agencies in the county. But one of the things it has, we put news notifications on it. But one of the things it does have is you can submit either a tip with your name on it or an anonymous tip. So if you suspect one of your neighbors for doing drugs or selling drugs out of their house, which I hope none of you are, you can actually submit an anonymous tip, and then we will respond to that tip. That tip can be, hey, people are speeding down my road. Can we get some help here? What it does is it goes to my public information officer and it goes to dispatch. Dispatch gets that email and they'll determine whether that is an emergency or not. If they see it and it's something that a deputy should respond to, they will send a deputy. If not, then they will send it to, if it's a drug issue, they'll send it to the drug sergeant. If it's a traffic issue, they'll send it to the traffic sergeant. This has been tremendously helpful for us. We've already busted several drug houses based on anonymous tips from residents in the community. If you don't follow us on Facebook, we put a lot of information on Facebook. It's a good place to find out what's going on. If you do not follow us on the website, get on there. We have our crime map there. So if you're ever curious as to what kind of crimes are going on in your neighborhood, pull up the crime map. You can get to it either off of the phone app or from the website. That'll take you to the crime map. And it's usually populates within, if a crime happens, it's within 24 hours that crime will pop up. Now, we don't put the exact home address. We just put the block. So 1500 to 1600 block of Golf Club Drive. So that's one way you can find out what's going on. You can see if there's a rash of burglaries in your area, you'll know whether you should take extra precautions at your home as well. Speaking of that, that's one of the things we get a lot here. If you're leaving town, get with the patrol. That house watch program is an amazing program. These folks go out to your house every day and they see if there's anything out of the ordinary there. Also, if you leave town, try not to cancel the newspaper. Do what you've got to do so that people don't see that you're gone. And let some neighbors know as well. Ring doorbells. Those doorbells are very good. They can catch people. And one thing that Ring does is if you have, does everybody know what a Ring doorbell is? It's a doorbell you can put on your house that actually has a camera on it. If somebody walks up, it trips it before they even touch the doorbell, and it will notify you on your phone. You can be in Canada or wherever you're at. It'll notify you, and you can see that somebody's at your doorstep. You can either call the police, or the Ring, you can actually talk to them and say, can I help you? And we see more burglaries averted by people, by them noticing that somebody might be in the house. You could be across the country, wherever. It'll notify you and you can say, can I help you? We're not interested, whatever it might be. So that's one thing that you can do. And if multiple of you have a Ring doorbell in your neighborhood, if there's a crime that does occur, we can contact the Ring doorbell owners in that street or that neighborhood, and they have the option. Ring will contact them and say, hey, there was a crime that occurred on your street. Could you please send us your video from this time to this time? They don't have to, but it helps us out as law enforcement if they do, because they might catch a vehicle that we didn't see on the victim's house. So definitely something to look into. They're very cheap. I think it's minimal fee a month and it records any action that goes on at your house or your doorstep. NextDoor, if you're not on NextDoor, we have over almost 45,000 people in this county that are on NextDoor. We posted twice this week. We had 10,000 views on that post. We've had almost 13,000 emails opened. We had 488 clicks on the articles that we put out, and 103 people said thank you. I'd like to see that thank you number a little higher, folks. So yeah, you guys live in a very safe community. No community in this country is free from crime, unfortunately. I know our deputies do a really good job of trying to make sure that you stay safe. Thank you to the patrol guys, because that's a tremendous help to us as well. And thank you to you who are vigilant neighbors and residents. That helps a lot too. So I'm going to save, if you have questions, we'll get them after, but those are the main things that we respond to and do. Now, once we deal with it, we take the jail end of it too. So if somebody does commit a crime, we'll book them in at the jail, which is in Florence. Once they're booked in the jail, then we turn it basically over to the county attorney and the judicial system. It's up to the judge whether he keeps them or not. That depends on just the nature of the crime. It depends on a bond amount, if the judge issues a bond amount. These are all things that the county attorney's office takes over for once we've booked them into the jail. So it doesn't mean that our part ends there, but it's about 90% done, because we work with the county attorney's office at that point to get them any extra information they may need, any extra evidence, lab reports, or anything that they may need. So that's pretty much the extent for us, and I'll turn it over to our county attorney.
What you're going to notice is there was sort of a theme, and it's pretty proportional. So the patrol is the first people that are normally contacted. They're on scene, but their involvement is a little smaller. And then it's dispatch, and then it's law enforcement. And then the criminal justice system, the real slog comes when it hits our office. And that's the reality. So I'm going to probably talk a little more than everyone else, because I think it's important that everyone understands the way the system works. The sheriff kind of left it off. A person's booked into jail. Well, there's two ways that we actually can get cases. We can get cases either where somebody is booked into jail or where they're not. When they're booked into jail, it's a little bit easier. So I'm going to start with those people. Just to give everyone kind of a general overview, our office receives about 5,000 police reports every year just for felonies. We then receive a couple thousand misdemeanors on top of that. Of those cases, we end up charging about 3,600 different cases. And a case can have 15 charges on it, but it's one set of circumstances with one defendant. Again, about 3,600 of those are charged. So we're doing on average almost 10 a day, 7 days a week. When somebody comes into the jail, our Constitution and the Arizona State Legislature, and our Arizona Constitution, U.S. Constitution, our revised statutes put very strict time limits on the way things have to go. Because again, if you've been arrested, if they've booked them, they're innocent until proven guilty. So they still have certain rights, even if we all know they're guilty. So what has to happen is once they are booked into the jail, they have 24 hours before a judge can see them. A judge must see them. If it exceeds 24 hours, we have to cut them loose. There's no discretion about it. The way that our court system works is we have judges that do two different settings of IAs. We have one that's roughly 10 o'clock until they see everybody that's in there, and another that starts about 2:30 or 3. So if you get booked in at 3:30, you end up spending the night until you see a judge at 10 in the morning. If you somehow get lucky and get booked in at noon, you might get out after a couple hours, but the reality is it normally doesn't happen. Once a person is booked in and the judge then sets a bond, on certain cases, we have a say in it. Some cases we don't. It just sort of depends. Maricopa County is a much larger county, as well as Pima County. They actually have attorneys that are permanently assigned at those courts, but they run 24 hours a day constantly. We don't. We rely on our law enforcement. If they say, hey, this is a bad guy, hey, this is a major case, hey, there's a particular issue, we will go there. But we don't set people there because, frankly, we don't have the resources to justify paying somebody $100,000 to sit and maybe talk 10 minutes a day. Once that bond is set, assuming they keep them in jail, we have 48 hours for our office to review and essentially agree with law enforcement that a charge is appropriate and to file a complaint. Because the way it works, and I have to be very clear here, the sheriff or the police officers, they arrest and they make a recommendation. They arrest with probable cause, believing that John Doe committed this burglary. They believe there's enough there. They believe there's probable cause. They book the person in. But within 48 hours, my office independently has to review the police report that they have to generate, and we have to come to the same conclusion that there is enough information, enough evidence to believe that this occurred. If we don't believe that happens, then we have to notify the jail and that person gets released. If we agree with them, then we have to file a complaint with the charges, because they'll make recommendations for charges. 95% of the time we agree, but there's sometimes we don't. Sometimes we think the charges should be more severe. Sometimes we think the charges should be less severe. Sometimes we know that this person already has a couple other cases with Casa Grande PD or Coolidge PD, and Florence, or excuse me, and the sheriff's office didn't realize it. So we may add additional charges that they weren't aware of. Once we file that complaint, we then have 10 days to get that before a grand jury. The way a grand jury works is, anybody ever sat on a grand jury? All right, I see two. The grand jury is sort of the buffer between law enforcement and the public. They are the check and balance sort of on the system. They hear the case. So what happens is we present the case and we use law enforcement to testify and say, hey, this is the information we have. These are the facts we have. This is the information we've uncovered. Is this enough information for you to believe that there's enough to go forward with charges? If the grand jury says, no, sorry, it's not there, the case is essentially terminated at that time. If our office believes that it should go forward, we actually reach back out to law enforcement. They do additional follow-up, and we can take it back to a grand jury at a later date. Sometimes a grand jury is called no true bill, meaning we don't believe there's enough there for crime, or we don't believe this is a crime. If that happens, that's where the case kind of ends. If, however, the grand jury says, yes, we agree with law enforcement, we agree with the county attorney's office, we believe that a crime has been committed, we believe that there's enough evidence to proceed forward, we then have 10 additional days to get that person before a judge for the arraignment. The arraignment is when the official charges are read to that person in open court and they are assigned an attorney. The way it works is, under Arizona law, you are entitled to an attorney. If you don't have the personal finances to afford that, you are entitled to either have a public defender appoint you, and if that public defender has a conflict for whatever reason, for example, if there's two of you, let's say it's a husband and wife team, the husband may get the public defender, the wife is still entitled to an attorney, so there's a list of contract attorneys. They go through the contract list and they appoint that person an attorney. That person is appointed at that 10-day mark. So again, just to kind of go through, before that person has really read their formal charges, it's normally somewhere between about 18 and 23 days, just kind of depending on where those 9 and 10 and 2 and 3 days fall. So the longest could be is 23 days. Realistically, if it's done within 15 to 18, that's a pretty quick turnaround. Once that happens, that is just the official charges being resolved. They are just now meeting their attorney. The court typically will set a hearing 45 days after that date. And that's really their first sort of meaningful hearing. It's called a PreTrial Conference. That is an opportunity where, in theory, the defendant should have spoken with his defense counsel, and we should have reviewed this case, reached out to law enforcement and said, hey, are there any loose ends that we want to follow up? So when the sheriff told you 90% of the case is done, I would say it's even more than that most of the time, because our law enforcement does a really good job of giving us a complete case. And sometimes our office will actually say, hey, before I submit this, let's get these sort of loose ends tied up. Let's go talk to that person again. Go find this person. Can you go check the scene? But assuming that there is something still going, that 45-day window is designed for us to reach out to law enforcement to get the information, and also for the defendant to meet his counsel. The reality is 98 to 99% of cases get resolved by plea agreement, and that candidly just depends on the person's willingness to take a plea oftentimes, also the strength of our case. What most people, I think, don't always appreciate or understand is it's extremely expensive to try a case. I told you that person gets a defense attorney. That defense attorney in our county gets paid $75 an hour for every single thing they do. Every time they think about the case, if they're taking a shower in the morning and they're washing their hair and they're thinking about the case, they get a bill for that time. When they drive to court, they get a bill for that time. When they are actually in court, they bill for that time. Every time they meet with their client, every police report they do, every time they speak with they ask to speak with the law enforcement. They do an interview. They get a bill for that. The average case that goes to trial, I can tell you from personal experience, at that $75 an hour is in the neighborhood of $10,000. So, and that's just the average case. That's the run-of-the-mill case. That's not a murder case. That is the burglary case. It's relatively simple. That is the person who stole your car. We know the person stole your car. We have their fingerprints on your steering wheel, which they shouldn't have. We have their DNA on your door handle. That case still costs about $10,000 just from the defense perspective. That doesn't include the state. That does not include the courts. That does not include the clerk. That doesn't include law enforcement's time and effort that they've put into this. Because when it goes to trial, law enforcement has to sit beside us for the entirety of this trial. This 2 or 3 day trial, he has to sit beside me, or his representative sits beside me the entire time, getting paid because we need them there. But because of that, we, in most cases, resolve by plea. That's just the reality. The cases that don't are typically one of 3 cases. Either a very serious case where we don't believe a plea is appropriate. The second type of case is, frankly, a case where the evidence may not be as strong and there's a possibility that the person could walk free. And then the third kind of case is, it's a really close case. And maybe the defendant says, I'm willing to roll the dice, or they're saying, look, I didn't do this, or, it's just one of those where we don't have the strongest case in the world, and they say, I want to go forward. Those are really the 3 cases that go to trial. In Pinal County, we have approximately, I would say, 85 cases a year that go to trial. And that's a really rough estimate. It's hard for me to give you an exact number because it just depends on those factors, how many cases we get, how many cases that it goes forward. We're one of the fall into one of those 3 categories. So I want to go backwards. I know I kind of went down this rabbit hole, but I want to go back for a little bit and talk specifically about those cases where the person is not booked into jail. Because law enforcement has the ability, if they think that person is a danger, that person is a risk to the community, they can book them into jail, but they don't always have to. They also have the ability to do what's called a long form complaint to us. And that's where they write the report, they send a complaint and say, look, county attorneys, we believe this should be charged. We've not booked this person in. We want you to look over this. If you need more information, let us know. Otherwise, we're asking you to look over this and potentially charge this case. Those are typically the cases where the person is not an imminent danger to the community. So if they know this person is burglarizing all the houses or burglarizing people's vehicles, they're going to book that person in. But if it is, for example, maybe a possession of marijuana case where they think, the person committed a crime, there should be a punishment involved, but we don't need to book them in jail. There's no real necessity for that. They can do a long form, or if they don't have really good facts and they're like, we're not sure if we have it. Those cases, the way it happens is it comes through our office, through our intake office. It then gets assigned to an attorney. That attorney just has a stack. And it's just when they get to it. We try and prioritize it. Obviously, the more serious the allegation, the higher priority it is. So if it's a murder, if it's a sexual assault case, where maybe the facts aren't the greatest, but we think it's there. If it's a case involving abuse of children or elderly, those are typically a higher priority. If it's a drug offense, just because of priority levels, that's sort of the lower one because they're a danger to themselves. They're not as big of a danger to us. And our office then has a stack. So my attorneys, after they're done with court, after they're done with their cases, after they're done with all those timeline emergency cases where we've got 24 hours and then 48 hours and then 10 days, then they sit back at their desk and they have to go through these one by one. This is on the top. They go through it. In a typical day, it takes a good attorney, if they have nothing else on their plate, can charge about 12 cases. And that's just kind of the reality. So my office, we have 45 attorneys, 43 attorneys, I believe, actually. The vast majority of them are on the criminal side, but not all of them. We have 8 attorneys whose sole job is actually to handle civil cases, because not only do we prosecute, we're also the civil advisors for the sheriff's office. So if they have questions or they're getting sued or there's issues, we have an entire division that works with them. We also have a law enforcement liaison. So one of my attorneys actually goes out to every time there's a police involved shooting and those type of things. I've got another attorney who works on really admin type stuff. I'm an attorney. We have supervisors. So at the end of the day, we have about 30 to 35 attorneys that really are criminal attorneys practicing. I'm not here to make any excuses, but I think it's important that people kind of understand that's the process that goes through. Now skipping back forward to where we're at before. So once that pretrial conference occurs, at that point, we up here have almost no say when a case gets resolved. It's really up to the defendant and the defendant's attorney. Because what happens is the defendant's attorney will come in and say, I need more time. I need another 30 days. I need another 60 days. I need to go speak with this expert. I need to get these DNA results. I need to get these fingerprint results. To give everyone an idea, our DPS lab that does all of our lab work, fingerprints, DNA, gunshot, they don't even do gunshot residue anymore, but drugs, those type of things, takes about 9 months to get those results because of the backup, because there are that many cases. Because again, we're charging in Pinal County 3,600 felonies. We have 450,000 people here. Compare that to Maricopa County, who has 4.5 million people. So they're probably submitting somewhere near 36,000 cases. Pima County is about 3 times the size of us. They're probably submitting about 10,000 felonies. So what happens is there's only a few agencies that can actually do this work. So there are all of these points where there's a slog involved. We prioritize victim cases, but our hands are sort of tied. And that's just for the reality. Once a resolution came to, whether that's by plea agreement or a trial date set, the case still isn't over. Because if a trial date's set, ordinarily the court will give it another 90 to 120 days to set that. There is a constitutional right to have a speedy trial, but that is the constitutional right of the defendant. And the defendant, in all but maybe 10 cases a year, very quickly waives that. Only time they ever invoke that right to speedy trial is if our case is pretty weak, or they want something resolved. If they've got a victim that they shot and they think that that victim may die, they'll get charged with murder if they die. They'll be like, no, let's try this case. It's an ag assault. Let's get this going, or I want to plead to this. Otherwise, they want to drag out as long as possible, because the cold reality is, if you all are the witnesses, they're hoping you die. Because if you die, we can't prosecute them. We don't have the witness. If evidence is lost, if there's a fire at the sheriff's office and all the evidence is burned up, we can't prosecute them. So they delay it as long as possible. The longer it is that an eyewitness has to go from the incident occurring to actually testifying in court, the worse their memory is. That happens to all of us. Just think about it. I remember what happened yesterday a whole lot better than I remember what happened 30 days ago and 60 days ago and 2 years ago. So it's the defendant tries to slow things down as much as possible. We try and speed things up as much as possible, and then the judge acts as a referee. The judge kind of says, look, we need to make sure that the person has a right to a fair trial and they have an opportunity to get all the information out. But on the other hand, they also want the fair administration of justice. And then again, if there are victims, we can typically speed the case up a little more. But the more involved those victims are, the better it is for us. I know it's a difficult thing for people to show up, but if you can show up, if you can reach out to our office, we have victim advocates. If you can let us know what your position is, we can normally use that to get a quicker and more speedy resolution.
And at $75 an hour, they have no problem dragging that case out.
And that is just if it's a regular case. If it's for example, a capital case, then they get 2 attorneys to get $125 an hour. So you want to talk about somebody that has no incentive to move a case quickly. It's when you pay somebody $125 an hour for every time they think about something. That is sort of the way a case goes. My hope is we have questions, because I really want this to be kind of interactive. I don't want to sit here and just kind of lecture people. The only caution I want to give everyone is we can't really talk about specific ongoing cases. We can speak about things generally. We can talk about the process. Cases that are closed, we can maybe talk about if there's been experiences that you didn't understand why something happened that way. We're more than willing to address that with you. The sheriff is, I'm sure. I think everyone is. We just ask that you don't say, I have a pending case and it's case CR 2017-00123. We can't really get into that because it's a pending case and it could get all of us in trouble.
And personally, from the sheriff, I know you may have questions that are outside this scope. I'm open for those too as well.
So anybody that has questions, the 2 mics, I'm not sure if they're turned on, but we do have 2 mics down here. And if those of you that have a little harder time getting down here, I can actually walk up and hand you a mic. So if you'll just raise your hand. Oh, come on. This is your sheriff and the county attorney that are stuck here with you, and we have to answer your questions.
And if you didn't hear her, she said that you can set your parameters of what, because if you live on a busy street and you've got it set to where everything in the street trips it, it'll trip it every time. So you can lower that box down to where it doesn't hit the street. So it really just hits anybody that basically comes into your yard. So you can adjust it to where it doesn't ding you every 10 seconds because a car drove by. So, and it does store it in the cloud. If you don't pay the fee, it doesn't store it for very long. If you pay the fee, it'll store it for a certain, however long you determine it. So very useful. We've solved crimes, even if there are people that will come and steal them, but you catch them on camera stealing it too. We've caught a lot of package thieves because of the Ring. It's been very successful for us.
There's no better evidence than a picture of the person committing the crime live. I mean, that's the reality. I think we have a question here to the left.
Yes, my name is Robbie Herrera, and I'm a new resident here from Colorado. And I have several questions for the district attorney. Are you, or county attorney?
Yes, let me just real clearly, because those of you that came here, Arizona is unique. I think there's 3 states where we have county attorneys. Most places have a district attorney who's the head of prosecution, and then separately they contract usually with a big private firm who does all the civil representation of the county, of all of the county elected officials. Arizona, I believe Washington, and maybe one other state combines that role. So the reality is I'm kind of that old guy that sits on a Law and Order in the closet that talks with the mayor and nobody else. I kind of have that role, but I also head up the civil division. So the reality is I'm a CEO. I was a practicing attorney, I was a trial attorney, but my role here really is administrative. So I have a head civil deputy who does all of the civil work, and then a head chief deputy, and I kind of give them guidance and come out and do kind of this stuff. I kind of jokingly call myself the Queen of England because I just kind of come out and do appearances and wave funny to people. So, but go ahead with your questions.
Okay, multiple questions. So first one is Arizona a VRA state? Victim Rights Amendment state?
Yes, our victim rights bill is actually in our Constitution. It was adopted long before I came around.
Right, probably in the 90s, right?
I believe so. It was, yeah,
Okay.
I know the guy that helped do it. It was Steve Twist, who is a very good victim rights attorney. I will tell you, our victim rights are not as strong as, for example, California. In California, victims have a right to be present at every hearing and to speak at every hearing and to actually be actively involved. So they can have an attorney that can ask questions and do those type of things. Arizona, you don't have that much latitude or that much power. You do have a right to be present at every hearing. You have a right to be told of every plea agreement or every potential resolution. If a trial is set, you have a right to be heard at sentencing. You have a right to be heard at the time that a plea is accepted or not. But at the end of the day, you don't have the ability to actually ask questions of the defendant or have an attorney ask questions on your behalf.
And also in VRA, is there in this state something that states talks about elder abuse, and does it use the language in the presence of?
Our state elder abuse laws are not particularly strong. I know that's a focus area. I don't believe that there is specific reference in the Victims' Bill of Rights. It's been a while since I've read it. Again, it's fairly long. I have read it a few different times, but I don't recall it having something specific. What Arizona does, though, is it actually says elderly people or those that are incapacitated, young, or unable to defend themselves are given sort of a special priority. So if you commit an offense against that person, it elevates the level of felony, so the punishment is increased.
Isn't it usually age 60 and over? Is elder considered elder?
So that's what the federal government states, and I don't know Arizona's cutoff. It's funny, if you ask somebody who's 62, they're not elderly.
Right. Okay.
So I'm going to leave that one alone.
All right, next question. You mentioned that you convene a grand jury. Is that for every felony case?
We have grand juries that run every Monday and every Wednesday from 8:30 to 5. And as the two people there can testify, sometimes it can go a little later than 5. But every Monday and Wednesday, they are running.
And what is the percentage of, and you can give me an average annual, ECU cases, felony theft, felony assault, felony child abuse, felony elder abuse, and murder with SBI?
Those are very specific numbers
Do
are
you-
very specific questions. I
Are they published on your website?
No, they are not.
Oh.
That's not something we have been in the process for the last 3 years prior to me actually getting a new system so we can better track some of those. I can tell you kind of generally, we had about 21 murders this year in Pinal County. That's actually the most we've ever had in Pinal County before. But before anybody gets kind of panicked about it, the reality is we're a growing community. I think we heard somebody say there's 2,000 more home addresses that just came up. So per capita, it's not the most dangerous it's ever been, but the sheer number. We also had a couple horrible homicides. There was one not far from here in Mammoth where there was a double homicide. There was a a quadruple homicide that occurred in Casa Grande, which has kind of skewed those numbers. You're using initials that we don't normally use. So if you can ask me specifically, I can help you a little better. And then honestly, the sheriff can probably help a little bit with this too.
Okay, ECU, economic crime cases, Ponzi schemes, that sort of thing, white collar crime. And SBI is serious bodily injury.
So your economic crimes, most of those are not generated in Pinal County. So just so you understand, if you're being scammed by somebody that's outside of Pinal County, we don't have the jurisdiction over that. You, the victim, are here, but they're committing the crime somewhere else. Typically, those are going to go to the FBI. When we get those, especially if they involve phones or mail fraud or any of those things, those will go to the FBI. We do have that a lot, and there are some local financial crimes, Ponzi type schemes. We would prosecute those, but those are honestly pretty limited. Most of them are going to be national crimes that are going to be handled by outside jurisdictions or the federal government.
Okay, I have one more question.
Look, I can answer a couple more of those real quick for you. So we would call those white collar crimes. And again, that's just the vernacular. It's just how we describe them. We have less than a handful that we charge on an annual basis.
Okay.
The AG's office actually kind of specializes in that area too, our Attorney General's office. So the Attorney General's office has statewide jurisdiction. We have jurisdiction within Pinal County. They just have specialists that's what they do. They have prosecutors. Their only job is to prosecute white collar crimes, white collar criminals. We have one person who has a small caseload that does it. We are capable, but normally the reality is Pinal County is on the socioeconomic scale fairly depressed. So a lot of people, if they're victimized here, they're victimizing other places because we don't have a huge pool to go from. And if it starts crossing boundaries, normally the AG's office will do it. So if people are being victimized here, chances are they're also victimizing people in Pima County. And if Pima County and us have kind of concurrent cases, the AG's office will take it. Or if you go north, where we have Gold Canyon, which again is a fairly well-to-do retirement community, there are people that are very well off. If they're targeted, they're also targeted in Maricopa County, and the AG kind of steps in. And then you had asked about violent crimes.
Well, assault and murder with SBI. Do you have a lot of SBI?
We don't use that definition.
Okay.
I think the language we use would be most appropriate or most similar would be serious felony. There's 705 crimes. 705 refers specifically to our statute. So it's the Arizona Revised Code, Title 13, Chapter 705. That lists all of our serious felonies, which would include armed robbery, murder, assault, those type of things. I don't have that number off the top of my head, and I apologize.
Now, in Pinal County, with every person you arrest, not charge, but that you arrest, do you have a mandatory DNA database? Do you take their DNA and put it into your database?
We do not. One of the things we do is if you go to the jail, we do scan your irises. So we do have some biometric. You're starting to get into the Fourth Amendment there when you start taking people's DNA if you don't have a reasonable reason to take their DNA. The only way I could take your DNA is if the crime, I needed that for evidence of the crime that you committed. Other than that, I'm encroaching very heavily on the Fourth Amendment, which is illegal search and seizure.
And what if they're charged?
If they're charged, once again, if you're charged for a felony for assault and your DNA, you hit somebody with a chair over the head, your DNA is irrelevant to that. You know, we have enough evidence without that. We could petition for it. We would have to write a search warrant and the judge would have to approve it. But we don't just randomly or standardly take the DNA from those people.
Okay, so there's not a DNA database in this county.
We do for convictions. So if you're
Convictions.
convicted of a felony, then you do. That is one of the rights that you forfeit. It is basically your right to privilege of your DNA. So you do go into a database. We're in with NCIC, and there's ACIC. So we have the Arizona and we have the national database. If you're convicted of a felony, absolutely, that's part of the sentence. DNA is drawn, it's put into that database. I don't believe our sheriff's department does that. I think DOC does it when they go there, though.
Okay, and just one more I'm curious about this is capital crime. How do you define that? Is that murdering one, two, or two or more people?
So capital can only be first-degree premeditated murder. So it has to first be premeditated. Then there is a lot of discretion, quite frankly, given to the county attorney's office when to charge it and when it's appropriate. There is dicta, and dicta is language in a Supreme Court case. While it's not controlling, it doesn't bind us, it kind of gives us guidance. The dicta in the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court cases, tells us that it really should be reserved for the sort of worst of the worst, the absolute most heinous that you can kind of imagine. Our interpretation of that roughly is it should be sort of this: if this isn't in the top 10% worst cases, then you should not be considering it to be a capital case. So that's just the first step. Then if you say, okay, this is premeditated first degree murder, we think that this is that worst of the worst, it fits into that category, then there's actual statutory guidance that says, okay, there are 9 different factors that we have to prove in order to go capital. If you have just one, you can go forward. I can tell you my internal policy with our office is we need to have at least 2. Those can be particularly cruel and heinous. It can be the age of the victim. So if it is an elderly person or a young child, it can be if you've been convicted of a serious felony before, if you've been convicted of murder before, any of those. There are 9 different factors. So again, our office policy is we have to have 2. So first has to be first degree murder. 2 has to be the worst of the worst. 3, it has to meet 2 of those different categories. And then if it meets all of those, then we actually look at the defendant themselves, and then we try and make a determination whether we think that we're actually going to be able to secure a capital conviction. Again, I'm going to horrify all of you and be very candid with you. I told you before, if you're doing a capital, you get $125 an hour as an attorney. They get 2 attorneys. The average capital case costs about $1.2 million just on the defense for the taxpayers. So when we elect to go capital, that means that my office has decided that I'm spending $1.2 million worth of your tax dollars. That's a decision. Now, I'm not telling you that as the guiding decision, but that is something that I owe it to everybody in this room. The sheriff told you we have a fiduciary duty to use your money wisely. We are funded by taxpayer dollars. That is something that we consider. So because it costs that much, we have to make sure it meets all of those categories. But then there's yet another sort of hurdle that we have to jump over, and that is, do we think that we can actually convince 12 people to say that this person deserves to die for their actions? Because we have to convince all 12 unanimously that this person deserves to die. If there is one person that just says, nope, I'm not okay with that, they don't get the death penalty. So things we typically look at is we look at the defendant. We look at what is their history, what would be sympathetic about this person. Things that juries typically have some sympathy for, I guess. Those that have been physically or sexually abused when they were children. Those that have serious mental health issues. Those that, if they're diagnosed schizophrenic, some of those type of things. If, various trauma experiences, those type of things. We kind of look at all of those. So we have this checklist to get to the point where we say, okay, we're going to proceed forward. I will tell you there's been 2 cases since I've been in office. I've been in office for about 15 months now, or 17 months now, excuse me. There are 2 cases and 3 defendants where we have elected to go capital. So of those 21 murders, probably 16 or 17 of those we could have elected, but because of the parameters that we place on our office, we didn't. But we did go on 3 defendants, and it was one who lured a person into the desert and killed them. It was very premeditated. He was trying to do it with other people, and it was absolutely horrific. and the other was a quadruple homicide, where two people came in and slaughtered 4 individuals while they were sleeping. No reason, no valid. I mean, there is no valid reason to murder somebody, but there was no real reason to do it. So those cases we have my office, and ultimately it's me. So we have an executive team, and we have a capital review team, which is normally made up of 12 of my most senior attorneys and/or advisors and bureau chiefs, our supervisors. They all sit down and we kind of talk about it. But at the end of the day, I make that final decision based on their recommendation and all the factors. So I know nice and light, but that's the answer.
Question over here.
Presence in SaddleBrooke? Is there an average response time once you're alerted from that alarm to when you get here? Because most burglaries we learned take 5, 6, 8 minutes. People looking for guns, coins, jewelry. Then I have a follow-up.
If you didn't ask, he was asking about the average time for response time. We're probably within 2 to 3 minutes of that alarm getting to the dispatch, to getting somebody kicked out. Probably within 5 minutes, deputies showing up. If it's a burglary in process, they're going to run code to that, which means lights and sirens. They're going to come hard charging to that. So usually the response time is pretty quick. Once it hits the dispatch, they start to kick it out. Like I said, they start backfilling info as that deputy's en route to that call.
Okay. Second observation, having lived here for several years, that I can just give to everyone here. The most important physical sign for people that are watching your house is that if your trash can or your recyclable can does not go out 2 weeks in a row, you're probably not there. So if you're gone, I would simply recommend that you have a neighbor or someone watching your house occasionally put your trash out by the curb. That at least suggests that someone's there or you're at home. Just something that we observed.
Thank you. And that's a great point. And just so you know, typically what our burglars nowadays are looking for are prescription pills and guns. If you do not have your serial numbers written down on your items that you like, the chances of recovering that are pretty much zero, because we can't prove that that's your item after. It's not like they used to do where they go for TVs and that. They still will take them occasionally, but they're really trying to get in there and take your prescription pills, your guns. Those are things that they can sell on the open market pretty quick.
Realize a prescription pill, $20. So if you've got a toothache, you went to the dentist or you had a dental procedure done, they gave you a script of 20 oxys, you use 4 or 5 of them, you got 15 sitting there. Those are $20 a piece that are sitting there. So when people come in, they can get those, they can sell them all day long like that. The same way with guns. They can get a few $100 for a gun immediately. There's a demand for them on the street. People aren't allowed to have them. So those are the things that they're looking for. Really, we've had cases that's been submitted to us to our sheriff's office where they went by, they didn't take diamond rings, they didn't take earrings and jewelry. They didn't care about that. They ended up taking guns and then a couple other real quick, easy things, and they go straight to the bathroom and they rifle through the medicine cabinets and they're out. But because they do it that quick, the gentleman that was just talking down here said 5 to 8 minutes. Yeah, that's what happens because they know what the high value items that they can quickly turn around. And the reality is most of the people that are burglarizing are drug addicts. Yeah. They are trying to get money so they can get high. They don't have time to sit and make real logical decisions. They're getting in, getting out, and getting that stuff sold so they can go buy their drugs to get high. Now, that's not everyone, but that's the vast majority of burglars that we deal with.
And those pills can go up to $100 a pill. So when you come down off of an opioid addiction, that is a miserable, miserable experience, and they will pay $100 for a pill. So
Hi, I just wonder if you could run through the typical procedure when someone's alarm goes off at their home. Can you tell me what you do with dispatch and everything else?
Thank you. And that's a great question because we did have some changes yesterday I presented to the board. I want to make you aware of those. But when we respond to an alarm, we're going to show up. Most of them will come off as either a panic alarm. There are panic alarms, there are burglary alarms. That's pretty much what we get. Every now you'll get some fire alarms and stuff that'll go off too. But when we respond, if it's a burglary in process, which means that maybe a neighbor called and said, hey, or maybe there is the alarm company will notify us saying this is a burglary in process. Somebody inside has tripped the sensors. We come hot to it. As we get closer, we'll turn our lights and sirens off so that our chances of us catching that person are higher. And if it's just a regular alarm, then we'll go through and check all the doors, the windows of your house. We'll make sure that there are no forcible signs of entry to make sure that there's nobody in there. Most of them are going to be panic alarms. We responded to, it was probably 2,500 to 3,000 alarms. I think almost all of them were false alarms. So, and if I could just take 1 second, we redid the ordinance. The ordinance now, you used to pay $10 a year. That started in 2002. Prices have gone up. We now charge $18 a year. It's only going up $8 a year. And then we used to charge $65 on your fourth false alarm. It has now gone up to $83. That is to compensate for the loss of the money that you, the taxpayer, are spending to send deputies out to those houses for false alarms. We notify you, hey, you've had 2, you've had 3 false alarms. Get it fixed. The next one's going to cost you. On panic alarms, you will get charged on your second panic alarm. That is a county ordinance. So those are the 2 changes, $18 a year and $83 for a false alarm.
How do you determine what is a false alarm?
So if we show up and we've gone out there to that house 3-4 times and no progress has been made. Now, if we show up and we see a javelina running around in your backyard, we're going to note that in there that alarm was set off by a javelina in the backyard or a bird crashing into the window and that set off the alarm. The deputy will notate it and they go through and look at it. But if it's the same thing over and over again, then we're going to charge for a false alarm.
Will they send you a notice?
They actually send you a notice on the 3rd time saying, hey, this is your 3rd false alarm. If you don't get it fixed, call your alarm company and have them come out and make some adjustments. Because if you don't, the next one's going to cost some money.
So my alarm went off recently and I did see the sheriff pull up because I have an outside camera, but he did not get out of the vehicle. He did not walk around, did not do any check at all. And there's also no note left on my door that the sheriff even came by. So I would just suggest that is a thing to do. At least leave a note, say your alarm went off. We came by because we came home. We had no idea what had happened. And we got all these phone calls. We had no idea. So, and we didn't know the sheriff had been there until we checked our video.
He should have checked the house. I'm going to tell you, we're not going to leave notes because that's the first sign for a burglar. They can test your alarm. Just trip it real quick and watch to see. And if I were to leave a note saying, hey, your alarm went off and that note sits there for 3 months, that's a good sign for that burglar. I will work on coming up with some other means of communication to let you know that a deputy did respond to your house. But I'm not for leaving the note because I think that leaves you vulnerable for burglars.
Okay, because when we're paying the fee, because in Connecticut, we don't have to pay a fee, and we've never had an issue with any alarms going off and anybody coming by. Here, we're paying a fee, and I would expect that somebody would come by.
Yeah, and they should have gotten out and checked all the doors and windows on the house. So
okay, thank you.
Well, I got maybe 2 questions. I got maybe 2 questions for the sheriff and county attorney. And One of them is just curious, how did, like, we just moved here just half a year ago. So how does the reservations laws correspond, especially like you, the sheriff, and how, and they have laws too, on my understanding, right? Got their own law enforcement. Who supersedes, and if something was to happen on a reservation, like one of us? The other
Great
question, can I, that's the other one, or, and already you asked this one once out there. What if you were, say, down Nogales, and this is a different county, and like an article I read, and you're out of your car, and somebody decides to put a box under your vehicle with a magnet with drugs in it, and like me, I know nothing about nothing, truly, about drugs, illegal. And so how, and you're coming up to the border, or maybe you got waved through and something happened, you got stopped again in a different county. How do you prove that you didn't do such a thing? I mean, who would, kind of, those two questions. Who supersedes who on a reservation? Because we obviously have lots of reservations in Arizona.
Two great questions. In Pinal County, we have 4 Native American reservations. We have Tohono O'odham, San Carlos, Ak-Chin, and Gila River. They are all sovereign nations. They are their own country within our county. They have their own laws. Some of them are based, there isn't an Indian Crimes Act for federal crimes. So for example, any of you, if you were on the reservation and you committed a crime, a victimless crime, let's say you were DUI on the reservation, you will be charged within the state. The state or the county will take that charge. If you are the victim of a crime from a Native American, they will charge the Native American federally if it was on a reservation. If you committed a crime against a Native American, it's a federal crime. If you commit a crime against another non-native on the reservation, the state will take it and the county will take it. There's a matrix to it, and it can get confusing, but it is, their crimes are not like ours. Sometimes on the reservation, you can assimilate state crimes. On the reservation I worked at, we had a major problem with drive-by shootings. There was no federal charge for drive-by shooting, so we had to assimilate the state statute on the reservation. I don't have any authority on the reservation. Even though it is in our county, they are it's their country, and so they actually are the ultimate authority on the reservation, or the feds will jump in and deal with it. BIA, FBI, DEA, one of those agencies. As it relates to, it's probably not going to happen very often, but I'm not going to say it wouldn't happen. If you had drugs placed in your vehicle, maybe they just wanted to get the Border Patrol to focus on you while they brought more drugs across. If you're claiming that those didn't belong to you, they're going to take some extra steps. They're going to look for fingerprints, DNA. They're going to look at your history. They're going to look at some other things to evaluate whether you're telling the truth or not. But believe it or not, there are people that are just normal people that the cartel will use to bring drugs across, because somebody like anybody in this crowd would be very inconspicuous, and the Border Patrol would most likely not stop you. So that is something they do on a regular basis. Putting it in your car, unbeknownst to you, is probably not as common. If it does happen, you just got to make sure that don't panic. Just let the process play out and let law enforcement and the county attorney's office work with you. Believe it or not, we're not out to try to say everybody's guilty. We want to make sure that we get it right. And I know that my office, Kent's office, whenever there's a crime, we want to make sure we get it right.
Yeah, just a real quick one on the fine or whatever for four false alarms. I would assume that that's per year, not cumulative. Is that correct?
No, if you keep getting them, if you keep stacking them up, you'll get $83 for every alarm charge you have after that. So this is an ordinance that started, it's a state statute, plus it's an ordinance that started in 2002. The only thing we did to the alarm, we didn't change any of the other penalties or anything, because it's a $50 penalty for non-compliance, $25 for non-registration, and $10 of interest for every month that you don't pay that $83.
Been here 20 years. It seems like 4 and 20 years would not be excessive. but
Oh,
that's the way it is.
excuse me. Yes, it's going to be 4 in a year.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
thank you.
Sorry about that. I misunderstood that. Yeah. I apologize. Yeah. That's going to be, it's not even necessarily a year. I mean, we have houses that we'll respond to every night for like a week. That's the problems we're looking at. We're not looking at the problem of you've had 4 alarm calls over a 12-month period. That's not our issue. Our issue is every time the wind blows, it sets off the alarm. That needs to be adjusted.
Thank you. Mike Harris, Unit 48. We had in our unit and the 2 adjoining units at the end of last summer, 6 breaking and enterings, particularly in houses where the residents were snowbirds. We had your lieutenant, district commander, come and talk to our unit, and basically the reaction from everyone that was there was that the lieutenant said, we don't have time to investigate petty crimes. And he also told us that the response time for his unit in the middle of the night, we could expect a 90-minute response time. I guess our feeling is that we're wondering what the sheriff's department is doing for us. We haven't, we don't know of any instances where you sent a fingerprint team out, did anything to really catch the criminals. And certainly our biggest, I guess, concern, other than losing our personal property, is that we understand that if these B&Es continue, one of these times somebody's going to be home, and then it could turn into a very violent crime. What are you doing for us?
That's a great question, and I'm sorry the lieutenant made you guys feel that way. Our numbers and our statistics will show that we do not have a 90-minute response time. You may get a 90-minute response time on a theft that there is no longer an active threat. So you may get a 90-minute response time because the deputies are dealing with calls that are active threats, DVs, other things. If it's not an active threat, we may take a little bit longer to get to your house to take the report. We apologize for that. That's a manpower issue. At night, I will promise you we can pull all the statistics. It's not going to be a 90-minute response time on those. So I don't know if he misspoke or it was misunderstood, but yeah, we could go back and pull those numbers. That's not going to be the case. Typically, we do not send a crime scene unit down for a burglary. The deputies should be taking fingerprints, and most often they are. You may not realize it, but when they're processing the scene, deputies are oftentimes taking fingerprints. If there's a rash of them, then we should have probably sent something else down here. I can tell you, it feels like sometimes we're not doing anything. We have busted burglar after burglar. We have caught a lot of drug dealers up in Oracle, San Manuel, that have had property in their houses. We've busted burglars over and over again. So the problem is we can't go out and do a touchdown dance every time we do catch somebody. We'd love to, but we just got to keep trucking along. We've pulled a lot of burglars off, and we can see it in our statistics when we take somebody down and we stop having burglaries in that area. Unfortunately, somebody else pops up down the road, and we got to track them down as well. So I know it probably feels frustrating, but we are on those things nonstop. With the resources we have, we take a lot of burglars down. In your area, I'll look into it and find out exactly what happened, and I'll speak with the lieutenant as to why you left that meeting feeling that way.
Thank you. Second question I have is...
Can I make a quick comment on that question? In terms of the HOA, our patrol, as we identified that there was more activity in these areas. Our patrol would go by those areas more often, and a lot of these these burglaries were reported after the fact, so it wasn't an active scene. And with my experience, we get the sheriff usually out here, not on an active scene, but with something that we're reporting. Within 30 to 45 minutes, the sheriff will be out here, and we'll be working with our patrol.
The second question I have is, over the last year, can you tell us how many crimes have been where you have arrested somebody, how many have been referred to the county attorney, and how many have been accepted by the county attorney for prosecution?
Are you talking about in this area?
Yes, in SaddleBrooke.
So we had 900 calls for service. 325 of those calls were 325. So 305 calls were 911 calls. 325 calls. I don't have the numbers offhand of how many arrests were made in those calls or what the nature of those calls were. But over a year, we had 325 calls where we actually were 911 calls. 908 total calls, which means people called the non-emergency number as well. That does not include medical calls. Those don't come to our office. If it's a medical call, they'll call the fire department. So I can pull those numbers for you, but I don't have those offhand.
Can I ask the county attorney the same question? How many SaddleBrooke prosecutions have you accepted? How many have you prosecuted? And have you had any of them that were adjudicated to the point of penalties?
We don't track by community. We track by law enforcement agency currently. So regrettably, SaddleBrooke is wrapped up into all of PCSO's numbers. Currently we don't have that ability to distinguish. As I had mentioned earlier, we are doing a different tracking system. So one of the things that we're trying to be able to parse out, like he has the crime map. We have no ability to actually make those determinations right now. I can only tell you the raw number of cases submitted by PCSO, cases charged from PCSO, but there's no geographical way to limit those currently. Sorry.
And I'm going to tell you, a lot of the cases where we catch people that we know are burglars, we're probably putting different charges on them. We're getting them off the street for other charges. We can't always attribute those burglaries to them, but we know. Here's the thing is, I have the burden of proof to show that with beyond a reasonable doubt, I have to have enough evidence to prove that a person committed a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the burden of proof that we have as the sheriff's office. We know there are crimes being committed. It frustrates us too, but that's what the requirement of the law is, and we have to meet that. So a lot of times we have to be creative. We have to find, when we find out who burglars are, we've got to put cases on them and work a lot of different angles to take these guys down. And where we can, we will attribute those burglaries to them.
One thing I'll note, and it sort of defies logic, it's actually a more serious offense to charge somebody with trafficking and stolen goods than the actual burglary itself. So that's just, there's quirks in Arizona law, but just the punishment, the level of felony and everything else, a trafficking and stolen goods is actually a much more serious offense. So a lot of times we'll prosecute that and take that angle as opposed to the burglary because the consequences are more severe. Doesn't make sense. I don't set the laws. I just have to abide by them. But that's one thing where, again, there aren't as many burglary cases. We direct these guys. I would rather you bring me a trafficking and stolen goods because I can get a more severe penalty, whether that's a lengthier prison time or a longer probation tail, or it's a prior. So if they come back, we can say like there's this pattern. So our office would actually prefer on the higher level charge come in because that gives us more ability to appropriately resolve a case. So that's another reason why you don't see as many burglaries. I care much more about the trafficking and stolen goods.
And if I catch a guy on a traffic stop with a stolen gun that came from your house, I may or may not be able to prove that he committed that burglary, but I can charge him for possession of a stolen firearm, which is a much more serious charge for that guy. So it's all about what we can prove. And I would love to sit here and tell you I'm going to prove these cases and throw these guys in jail. I have a responsibility to show that they committed that crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Look, burglary, I'm going to tell you, burglary is all across this county and across this country. It is a tough one for us as law enforcement to put together. And unfortunately, it takes multiple burglaries typically before you can take a ring down. And so these are frustrating calls for us. I know it's extremely frustrating for you, the victims, but they are calls that I can tell you we actively are working because we know we have a good idea who are doing those. And sometimes we have to take them down a different route.
Gary Adams, Unit 46. I have a question for dispatch. Previously, we had delays in reporting medical emergencies. The previous administration told us to make sure as soon as we dial 911, that's just from a cell phone or a voice over internet phone, to tell them we need Pinal County dispatch. Is that still a problem? Apparently these calls were going down to Pima County, and it was a big rigmarole to get back here to Golden Ranch for a response. Can you address that?
So that depends on their cell phone tower. So if you're calling from a landline, it's programmed into your system that a landline will go to Pinal County.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about
if you call from a cell phone, we don't have any control over what tower your phone hits. If your tower hits a phone, if your phone takes on a tower in Pima County, unfortunately that call is going to go to Pima County. And then the phones have this memory in them that when you call 911, now that phone remembers that 911 call and is most likely going to call Pima County again. They're really, I mean, Bob could probably talk to it, but that is we deal with that all the time. And because of where you guys are right on the border of Pima County and Pinal County, that's going to be an occurrence.
It also affects the geography and how busy a cell tower, how many calls they're getting. It'll bounce off a different tower. Like out here on Edwin Road, you've got a couple towers. They're programmed when you're on this side to come to the Pinal County Sheriff's Office. If you're south of Edwin, it's going to bounce to Pima. But a lot of it depends on how many calls are going through that tower, because it could bounce off a different tower.
But is that wise for us to call, when we call in, to say, I need Pinal County dispatch?
You really need to give us an address. If you give us an address, whoever answers the phone, whether it's Pima County or Pinal County, we'll pull it up in our computer and it'll say where it's located.
But if it goes to Pinal County or Pima County dispatch, how do you get involved in?
They'll transfer the call to us.
Okay.
Because they'll look up the number. They'll say, well, that's not in Pima County. And you'll say, no, I'm in Pinal. They'll transfer it immediately to us.
So it doesn't save any time for the emergency response for me to tell you I need Pinal County dispatch.
You can, as long as you're assured that you're on this side of Edwin Road.
That's the most important thing. Given the address is the most important thing we need right away.
Okay.
If you call and say, I need Pinal, they're going to say, well, what's your address? Okay. So if you just give them your address, they'll tell you where you need to, they'll put you where you need to go. Because if you say, hey, I need Pinal County Sheriff's Office. Okay, what's your address? Then you're going to put it in, then they'll transfer you. So if you give the address, you're going to save a little bit of time.
Okay, thank you. And one quick question for the county attorney. Have you ever heard of a no trespass order for strange vehicles frequenting our development here?
No.
Well, it's something that came up in the western United States, place called California. That was something they did. And so it came up with the patrol that they've got on occasion, the same vehicle driving through here at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
So our office typically does not handle traffic offenses. The majority of traffic offenses in the state of Arizona are civil in nature. And if they're civil, we don't handle them. Even though we have a civil department, we don't prosecute those civil type cases. And I believe that type of case most likely would be a civil citation, which just means there would be a fine associated with it. Our office does not get involved with those cases. I can't promise you that it doesn't exist, and we've not ever prosecuted it, but that's never been brought to my attention. I've never.
I think the thrust was that if this order was issued and we could present it to the offending party, then maybe our problem would go away. So I don't know.
You could ask, you can trespass somebody from the road. So if you consistently, you can't really trespass a vehicle, but you could take that driver and say, you're trespassed from this community. Then if you catch him in there again, then we can get involved and write him a citation for trespassing. If he continues to do it, there are different criteria for first degree trespassing, second degree, third. So you have to be able to justify what type of trespassing it is. In most cases, it's going to be a very menial trespassing, but it's still, nonetheless, it's a hassle for that person.
Right. Thank you very much.
We get a lot of that, and that's why we have our phone app. We hope that if it's not an emergency, you'll just pull your phone app. It's got the non-emergency number in there. Please, 911 is really for emergencies. If you're not sure, dial 911. But if you know, like, hey, I showed up to my house and my house was ransacked, that's a non-emergency. There's nobody in there. If you show up and you're in an accident, that's not a 911 unless somebody's hurt. You can call the non-emergency number and ask for a deputy. 911 is for emergencies. You need fire or police now, and that's what that's for. Yeah. Yeah, anytime there's weapons involved, when they tell us there's a weapon involved, we treat it very serious as well, so. Why? Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. For one, I scrutinized the paper. I missed is this the third in the series? Yeah, I missed it. I'm sure there were a number of other people that did. I, for one, from Unit 8A, would be happy to be a liaison if you do this again to get separate flyers out to the community, because I read the paper, I make sure I'm current on what's going on, and I missed the first two. I'm sure there were a number of other people that did that would very much like to be here. We were just thrilled we could catch this, or I would have been better prepared for one of the questions that I want to ask you. But before I do, I want to say they are also looking burglars for identity information. So, you know, we are getting some of our mail stolen too, just FYI, if you didn't know that. But in our home, in addition to looking for cash, guns, jewelry was taken. They also stole identity information. I had an old letter from my mother who was dying, and she had listed in that letter her social security number and some pertinent information for us kids. Letter was gone, and an old driver's license that I had kept, because it was an out-of-state one and it had a cute picture on it. So I kept that, gone. So those are things that I know that they're taking identity info as well. So we, in addition to having it cost us to beef up our security, we also got LifeLock. You know, we're trying to protect ourselves, but the way they broke in, I just want to say this real quick, they didn't break anything. We learned that by pushing in our sliding bedroom window and taking it off the rail, they could access our home. So then we replaced all the windows with more secure windows. So that's how they got into ours. And because we don't have a way of getting this information out to everybody, I just wanted to share that. You may want to take that into consideration. Simply came out, pushed the window in, took it off the rail. One of the questions I wanted to ask, and had I known, I would have been better prepared to quote the case, but there's a lot more going on around now with regard to elder napping, and CPS getting involved in child napping. And you, I'm sure, are aware of that big case where there was an arrest, and I don't know, was it Pinal, but it was in Arizona. And I was reading that Arizona is becoming one of the top states for this kind of CPS involvement in child napping, that there's monies involved, that is it that the state gets paid or that these organizations get paid by the state for this. Again, I would have had my info and been better prepared, but I want to ask you, you're aware obviously of this, and is this something that it's becoming big all over the United States, the elder napping thing. Is that something that you can share a little bit of information with us on how you're handling those things? Because I understand that with just a call from CPS to police authorities, that you can come out and take a kid. Now, we have grandkids, a lot of us. Based on just that CPS's recommendation alone, can remove a child from a home, and then the state gets awarded, that child for until this family then can prove otherwise. Again, I would have had all my info together if I'd had more notice, but can you address that?
So your information is generally correct, but I need to just clarify a couple issues. DCS currently, as constituted, does not need to get law enforcement's involvement to remove a child. DCS has the authority pursuant to state statute to actually come in and remove a child all on their own. They can, after the fact, actually submit something to the court saying, hey, we took this child, this is the reason why. The court, after the fact, can essentially say, yes, you had good grounds to do it, or no, return the child. But that hearing is usually not set for a couple days, so DCS has the authority just to remove. I will tell you, though, that effective July 1st, our state statute is changing. It actually has changed. It's just the effective date is July 1st. DCS now is required to get a warrant from a judge. So they have to say, look, here's the probable cause standard, much like our police are required to have probable cause to arrest somebody, probable cause to book them into the jail. They can't say, you know what, I don't like the color of your shirt, I'm putting you in jail. The state has heard enough complaints from citizens, and our legislators have seen it fit to actually modify Arizona revised statutes to change that. I will tell you, there's detractors on the other side, because now it's another hurdle because you have a child who's potentially in danger. So it's a balancing act, and essentially our state legislature has come to the conclusion that the pendulum has swung too far, where DCS, CPS, DCS, DCYF, they're all the same agency, depending on what state you're originally from. Essentially, they've said that that swung too far to where they had too much authority, so they've brought it back. So now there must be judicial involvement, which is a fundamental change in the process. And again, that is happening July 1st. My office does work with DCS on a regular basis. We do that just to make sure that things are going okay. I know our sheriff's office does as well, because DCS is involved in most cases where there's child abuse. If mother is beating the child and dad is picking mom's side over the child, that child will need to be removed, and we need to make sure we know where that child's at so the law enforcement can speak with the child. We can make sure that we have an interview, make sure we can build the case, etc. But there has been a fundamental change in Arizona, and that's Arizona's response to the issue that you addressed. As far as the elder, I don't know. That's news to me, so I'm not going to speak on that. Not because I don't want to, I don't know the answer.
Thank you. My name is Charles Arand. I've been in Unit 27 now for 18 to 19 years. The community is growing. The needs of the community, if I understand your policing problems at this point, and I appreciate the budget limitations that you mentioned. At the same time, there are 10 to 12,000 people here in this community. And I'm wondering, given the fact that you have, as I understand it, just one officer on duty at night for this portion of the county, which runs from San Manuel down to here, the response time cannot be within a reasonable time one might expect in a community of 10 to 12,000. There may be other options, and the one, of course, is this community incorporate and then provide their own police protection. That's one option. Another option that I don't know if it's been discussed and explored would be some kind of reciprocal agreement with Pima County, which is, just down the street here, about a couple hundred yards from us. And the ability of Pima to also assist in a crime that's being committed. Would you care to respond to that, sir?
Yeah, Pima probably has the same personnel issues we do. That all the counties do. Your information is not correct. There are 3 deputies on and a sergeant on every night. 12-hour shifts. We work 12-hour shifts. You have one that's supposed to be here in SaddleBrooke, one that should be in Oracle, one that should be in San Manuel. I'm going to tell you, for this region, the majority of the crimes that we have happen in the Oracle, San Manuel area, not here. So sometimes those guys have to shift up to deal with crimes up in those areas, and you may have a spot time where a deputy's not down here. If you're going off of crime numbers, you guys have a good amount of deputies for the amount of crime that's in this region. We only have one. We run 7 deputies for 111,000 people in Santan Valley. Average age of 27 years old. Domestic violence, drug charge, DUIs. You have more law enforcement presence here per capita than they do up there. So I know you would love to have more police. I would love to have more deputies down here. But you guys already have more law enforcement based on calls for service and per capita than any other part of the county does.
Sheriff Mike Harris again. For your information, when you go to the crime reporting or crime map provided by your organization, it appears when you go to breaking and entering that we've had like one break-in in many, many months. And it's not until you dig very, very deeply into the site that you find that all of the rest of these were placed under something called miscellaneous at the very bottom of the list. And it wasn't until many weeks of looking at this that somebody finally discovered this. Is there some way we can get that more accurate?
So that has to do a lot with UCR, Unified Crime Reporting. This map was put in place after I took office. We got everything mapped. So there's probably a lot of old stuff that I don't know how it got categorized. It could have gotten categorized as miscellaneous. I know from what we're doing now, we've tried to be consistent so that those crimes that are happening are being reported and going properly into the crime mapping. But I mean, this was something that we started last year, so there probably are some flaws to it from before it started. And I can go back and take a look and see how long ago those crimes occurred to see if that was the issue. Sometimes crimes start off as a burglary, but then end up no information or no evidence to support that. So you may not see it show up. So there could be a lot of different reasons why, but we can definitely take a look at that. I got my PIO here, so we'll take a look at that mapping with our IT guy and figure out if there are any flaws to it.
Well, for your information, all of the ones that we were searching for were in the August, September 2017.
Okay.
Time.
Then those should have showed up. So let me take a look at that. So you know it's not my program. This is LexisNexis. They do it for us. It's no cost to you, the taxpayer. So I'll have to address that with them to find out why those aren't showing up, because that's concerning if they're not. I'm sorry, folks. I've got to get running, but I don't know if these guys said they want to stay a little longer. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for your questions. And please correspond with us if you need something from the sheriff's office down here. That's the only way I'm going to know. So if you let me know, I promise you, you can ask anybody in my office. Everything that comes to me, we deal with it. So please let us know.
Thanks for coming out, everyone.